go shout out.
How you doing?
Very good, how are you?
We're good.
Sadly, people
You're there. Barbara's there.
What's the order again?
Testing.
I'll be brief. I'll be brief so you don't get cut.
This looks like Woodstock here. Look at all these folks coming in.
It is, yeah, now it's important.
So I have a question. Did anybody digging through your closets and so forth really have a lot of difficulty finding anything to wear tonight? I didn't, I know. It's like you never get rid of anything. Oh well. Wow.
Yours is great.
I love this. Thank goodness the rain stopped too. This is great. Good evening, everybody. Again, welcome to the February meeting of the Tallahassee Historical Society, and welcome to our guests from the Miccosukee Land Co-Op. I'm your president, of course, Bob Holliday. And yes, I had to rummage through my closet to find something from the 1970s to wear, sort of. The sad, or maybe the funny thing, is that I really didn't have to rummage very far. I'll have a few announcements to make at the end tonight about upcoming events and so forth. So don't rush up and leave, although you may want to do that. We try to offer at least one meeting per year where we do something a little different than having a single speaker. And when our secretary, Tom Eaton, raise your hand. When our secretary, Tom Eaton, suggested a program on the Land Co-op, I think all of us on the board immediately liked the idea. You wouldn't know it, But straight-laced Tom and Susan, his wife, ex-military, have a hidden side to them. Every weekend they go up to the co-op and with others give ukulele concerts. I mean, who
It's a
knew?
jam.
We invited residents of the co-op, some of whom have lived there since it was founded in 1974, to join us, give us their take on what it has been like, take our questions, and educate us. There have been lots of myths and legends about the co-op. There always are. And when you bring it up to straight-laced residents of, say, Killarn, as often as not, you're going to get a snicker or a chortle and a knowing glance. Oh, you mean those people? We want tonight to be fun, which is why we suggested we all root through our closets. But there's a very serious subtext to this, I think. Alternative communities in the United States have been in existence since the early 19th century. An Englishwoman, Frances Wright, started an Neshoba community near Memphis. Amana and Oneida, which sell silver and appliances now, started out as communes. Several, like the Shakers in Kentucky, were religious communities. One of the most famous was simply called The Farm in Tennessee, and of course they proliferated in the 1960s. There are at least 300 of them across the nation right now. Besides the question of whether the Miccosukee Land Co-op can even be considered a commune in the stereotypical sense, there is the question of motivation. All the communities that I know of seem to share a certain discomfort with the prevailing American cultural and economic values, and have decided to ask the fundamental question, I think, of what makes the good life. It is a good question and an important question. And to help us explore that and others, I would like to present our panelists, and then I'll turn it over to David. Dave Brightbill, right here at the end. Tom Kelly, James Brudenell, Barbara Hengestebeck, I'll never get it right.
Got it right.
Did I? God help me. Preston Howard and Jasmine Kelly. And I'm going to turn the mic over to David and let him take it from here.
Thank you so much. You know, when we heard that y'all were going to dress up in clothes from the era of the 70s, several of us thought about coming in three-piece suits and wear, but we just couldn't find any. At least I couldn't find any that fit me, so we're just going to have to do what we can. And several of us are wearing shirts from different anniversaries of the Land Co-op over the years. We're 51 years old this year. We've been around for a while, and we're not the only community like ours in this part of the world. There's other similar communities here in Leon County and in the 5 or 6 surrounding counties. There's other communities that are like ours, but ours is large and pretty successful compared to what happened to many of the communities from that period of time. I was the 13th person to buy land at the Land Co-op, swamp land at the Land Co-op, and I just can't tell you what a good thing it's been for my life. Kind of the format today. I want to also say that it's nice to see some old friends here and meet some new friends and some neighbors here in the audience too. We're honored that y'all came and listened to us, talk our nonsense and everything. The way this is going to work is that each person here is going to have a little chance to talk about a different aspect of the community, and then at the end we're going to take questions. And Tom may have to sneak out a little early, so we'll answer questions on his behalf. We'll make something up if you have questions. So it'll be fine. So we're going to start with Preston Howard. I've known Preston for 51 years probably, and I'm glad he's here, and I'm glad he's my neighbor.
So I'm going to talk to you about how the co-op got started. And if we all go back to the early 1970s, there was a lot of feeling throughout the country about getting back to the land, and Earth Day and things like that were happening. And Tallahassee was no different. And in Tallahassee, there was a group that began to talk about how they might be able to engineer some kind of a back to the land kind of an event that would do what they wanted to do. And this idea began and continued to grow as at some point before I got involved, apparently people were serious enough that they started to pool money. And somewhere along the way, we had a very fortunate situation where a couple of well-established local families, Chris and Carol Healy and Jeff and Anna Van Pelt, they had a group that they had set up called the Small Change Foundation. It was small change because it didn't have a lot of money in the foundation, but also it was designed to make small changes. So what they tended to do mostly was out in the rural areas where someone had property, they would work with them to be able to get them like a farmer's home administration mortgage where they could have their house. So this was a really big project for them. But at some point, it seemed like there might be a critical mass of people who were interested in property, and they and others that were active at that time, much more so probably Davey than me, were able to identify a 240-acre parcel. And if you saw the fancy thing that I had outside, that was the original layout. And the way that it was set up was that they bought a 90-day option on the property, and if you thought you wanted to get in, there was a certain fee that you would pay per acre. You could buy 1 to 10 acres. So however many acres, there was an amount of money you put down. And if all of the 240 acres, it was pretty well thought out that 160 acres probably had home sites, and 80 acres probably had land too low for septic tanks. God never intended them to have that. And the deal was that if all of the 160 acres could be committed within the 90 days, they'd exercise the option to buy, and then everybody would pay an equal amount again, and the bus would be rolling, and then each owner would get a contract for deed and make monthly payments. Now, nobody knew where their property was going to be at this point, but you just knew that you had property. So at that point, the question then was, how do you, and of course the property, we went forward with it. Well, the Small Change Foundation folks, they were able to identify the premier development company in the state of Florida who had the reputation to do it the right way, and it was called the King Healy Company. King Healy was the master architect behind the group, and so we had him come to give a presentation to the group. Our group met on campus in one of the large auditorium-style classrooms. So here's 150 people sitting in the Coliseum kind of thing, looking down. And King Healy had brought 2 of his staff, and Jeff Van Pelt was standing there, and King Healy talked about his firm and its abilities and things like that, and everybody was pretty excited because they were saying all the right words. And Jeff Van Pelt turns to King Healy and he says, "That's right, and we'd like you to do the development subdivision, laying out the lots for this property. And we have $25,000 smackers in the bank right now for this project." And King Healy sort of goes, "Was there a zero missing?" "No, sir. he said, you know, we have a lot of people who come to us because they know we know how to do it the right way. And they want us to do it for that reason, as long as we can get 6 units an acre. They want us to do it because they know we know how to do it right, as long as we can make their price point work out for them. He says, now let me see if I understand what's going down here now. You want us to do this development for you because you know we know how to do it right, and that's what you want, period. Is that the deal that's going down here? And everybody said, that's the deal, that's the deal. And he sort of looked at me and he said, well, if that's the deal, we'll do it. And they did. They sent botanists, hydrologists, soil scientists, residential planners out, and they scoured that property from one corner to the other. They found where the low areas were. They found where the home sites could be built. They did all of the work like that. They had sociologists that did a survey of everybody. You know, who are you? What do you want in this community? Well, I want a big garden. Oh, okay, write that down. You know, I want to be way out in the woods. Oh, okay, write that down. You know, some people would say, well, I want the property that has that big oak tree over there. Well, that's great. Now, when you signed up, your sheet had a number on it. What was your number? Well, my number was whatever, 42. Well, somebody else has already asked about that, and their number was 26. So they're going to have first dibs on that oak tree, because that was the way that we worked that. As for myself, what I put on my sheet was that I needed to be next door to a particular family who was the fellow that I went to high school with. We had situations like that. I want to be right next to, I don't care where my property is, I want to be next door to these people. So they did all of that, and eventually they said, we're ready to show you the work, and they basically, what you saw was, I think that their second pass, there were some minor changes when we saw it the first time, but that's pretty much, if you saw the fancy vellum, that was it. And after that, it was just a question of making it all go. So the first thing was getting the engineers out to actually survey where the lines were, and that was done. And then people were ready to be building, and probably some started a little earlier, but we needed to have electricity. Talcon came and they said, okay, we got a power pole here, and the initial properties that we're building were not out by the road, they were way back in the interior. And Talcon says, well, that's 4 power poles from here, my power pole to you, where you need. No, because that's going across 6 people's property, including 4 home sites. You can't put a power line there. You got to go down this road. And they look at the map and say, it's called Long and Winding Road. And we're going to have to do 14 poles to get this. They thought we were going to fold up our camp in about 6 months. But that wasn't the case. People started building, and it's been a going concern ever since. So I'll be happy to answer questions after, and I'll pass the mic to Tom.
I would prefer to stand up myself, so I'm gonna go over here. So, yeah, this is my hippie outfit. And I've been dressing like this for 50-something years.
I saw you yesterday, and you had the same thing on.
Yeah. But, you know, the work boots, now I don't normally wear them to things like this anymore, but in the early days, I was a carpenter, I had to have work boots, and that's all I could afford, so I had no other shoes, so they went everywhere, so that's my uniform. On your website, I was supposed to be talking about the prehistory of the land co-op, but I just don't have enough to talk about, so I decided to speak about the early days and some of the things that I did and others did. So I'm going to read this, and the whole presentation is called Disaster Deflected. It'll take a while to get to, but I'll get there. So after tearing down a tobacco barn, I moved to the land in 1975. No electricity, no water. Those were only available at the top of the hill at a trailer that came with the land. I lived in a World War II vintage Army surplus tent. I framed up and screened a small room inside the tent to escape the mosquitoes. It was a large tent, so there was plenty of room. I had an outside kitchen with a Coleman stove, and when Talcott ran our electric lines, life improved. I got an old refrigerator, and now could begin work on my house in earnest. A refrigerator and electric tools, what joy. The next, whoops, I'm supposed to skip to the next page here. A number of early land co-opers were tearing down tobacco barns to provide lumber for their houses. The shade tobacco business was no longer viable in Gadsden County. The farmers were paying taxes on all these large barns that had been built to dry the tobacco. So they started giving them away to anyone who would tear them down. All of us back to the land hippies started taking advantage of the free lumber. Free if you didn't count the labor it took to take them down. But for energetic young folks with no money, it was a good deal. Soon the farmers realized there was a market for these barns, and they started to sell them. Still, they were very cheap. David Felder, a land co-oper, had started a business tearing them down. He had a lumber yard on Route 20 west of town where he was selling some of his lumber. And another co-oper, Bill Martin, and myself made a deal with David to tear down a barn. David bought the barn. He bought us a chainsaw and rented a big truck to haul the lumber away, and Bill and I did all the work. We split the lumber 3 ways. It was quite an adventure, and I have some pictures out on the table out there of us tearing that barn down. But all 3 of us got a small house out of it. When land co-opers had torn down barns, started applying for building permits, we had a rude awakening. The building code required lumber to be grade stamped. It was not possible to grade stamp rough cut lumber. Panic. Was all that work for naught? Realizing that the old growth pine was way stronger than the grade stamp lumber you got at the lumber supply, the head of the Leon County Building Department gave us an exemption to use it. In this case, disaster diverted. By the next winter, I had framed the house and dried in the roof. So now we're getting to the story I started to tell. By the next winter, I had framed the house and dried the roof, but I ran out of money and had nothing I could use for the subfloor. There was no lumber in the barn suitable for that. So it was open joists throughout the house with walls and a roof. Then a strong cold front came through and ripped my old tent to shreds. Remember, it's World War II vintage. What to do? Well, I scraped together enough money to buy some 1x6 boards, put a subfloor in what was to be my bathroom. I got builder's foil on the walls and moved in. Does anybody know what builder's foil is? It was something they used similar to tar paper put on walls. It was like paper with a little foil on it. And that's what I lived in. My neighbor gave me a wood stove made from a 55-gallon drum. I installed the stovepipe, and now I was cozy. All I had handy to burn was heart pine wood scraps from my house construction. I actually brought a sample of the heart pine from that barn. If you don't know, heart pine was from the old growth forest, so it was virgin lumber that was harvested in this region. And it's very dense, resinous. Okay. One very cold evening, I decided to put a chunk of particularly resinous 6x6 on the fire. Fire was already going good. And it didn't take long for me to realize my mistake. The 6x6 started to sizzle, resin bubbling out of it. The fire was too hot to retrieve it. I knew what was coming. That chunk exploded into flame. In less than a minute, the wood stove was glowing red. Then a black smoking spot appeared on the 2x4 stud behind the stove. I had nothing behind the stove. Panic. I could see the house I had just spent a year building going up in a giant inferno. I ran outside looking for something I could put between the stove and the studs. I found a piece of metal roofing, fortunately short enough to just fit in there. I put it behind the stove. It did the trick. That 2x4 never exploded into flame, and soon the stove stopped glowing red. Disaster deflected.
Okay, my name is Barbara, and before I really start my talk, you ever heard the joke about 5 blind people with their hand on an elephant, and they're each asked to describe what they're holding, and one's holding the trunk and describes it a certain way, and one's holding the ear and describes it a certain way? Well, that's kind of how I felt living in the part of the co-op that I was in. I was in 1974. I was a student in my senior year at FSU, and the guy that I was dating, who ended up being my first husband, picked up Jeff Van Pelt hitchhiking, which was done in those days. You picked up hitchhikers, and he picked up Jeff Van Pelt, and Jeff Van Pelt was telling him about this wonderful alternative community that was being started outside Tallahassee, and that people were going to build their own homes with their own hands. You'd never have a mortgage. We would all live in community, have gardens. We would help each other build our houses. And he came to pick me up for a date, and he was just all excited about this. We had been planning our wedding. We had been planning a trip to Alaska, and all of a sudden, now it was all about, I put our names on the waiting list, and we're going to get into the Miccosukee Land Co-op. So he wanted to take me out and see where we were going to live. Now, I'm going to tag on to what Preston was saying. The original purchase was 240 acres, but that filled up right away. I mean, they went through the waiting list, filled up right away. So what did they do? They went down the road 2 miles, and they bought 40 more acres. And that's where we were number 100 on the list. And so we were able to get our acre in the 40 acres. It's down Crump Road, 1 mile to the 4-way stop. You turn right and you go down 1 mile to Proctor Road. And there's another little known section of the land co-op down that road, 40 acres. And that's where our acre was. Now, the other thing, Preston, nobody's mentioned so far is we have a pretty elaborate system of governance at the land co-op. I mean, we have this reputation of being a bunch of flaky hippies that, just, I don't know. I don't even know what our reputation is. Running around naked, swimming in the mud or something. I don't know. But we have a very elaborate system of governance. Our then 280 acres was divided into 7 neighborhood groups. And each of those neighborhoods has a name, and each neighborhood has a representative that is elected by their neighborhood that serves on our town council, which meets once a month to discuss and decide and vote on all of the things that affect the whole neighborhood. So our neighborhood, being north and west of the main part of the co-op, was named the Northwest Kingdom. So my little part of the elephant is a little bit different than the 240. Still part of the co-op, separate, but the same. So my fiance at the time was so excited about the fact that we were on the waiting list to be in the co-op, he was going to drive me out there to show me where our property was. Now, as Preston said, nobody knew where their property was. It was in there somewhere. And we were no different. He drove me out there in his old red pickup truck. He had brought me a pair of rubber boots to put on, which, as it turns out, was very, very necessary because there was so much rain that year. It was really pretty mucky out there. And he pulls up there at the corner of Proctor and Crump and said, "Our property's back there." Well, all I saw was a bunch of little trees and a bunch of scrub and a bunch of, bushes and whatever. And I said, "We're gonna walk back there." He says, "Yeah, we're back in the back. I picked us way back in the back. We're way back in the back." So we started, trudging through this property, which turned out to be mostly blackberry bushes and poison ivy, which I was really glad. I'm really highly allergic to poison ivy, so I was really glad for the rubber boots. So we walked back there, and he says, "I think it's around here somewhere, but we won't really know until we put the roads in." And I'm like, "We gotta put the roads in?" He goes, "Yeah, we gotta put the roads in." I said, "How are we gonna do that?" And so we walked back up to the front. There was this old shack with an old wooden chimney. Nobody had lived in it for decades probably. And there was another old shed up there, and in that shed was the oldest tractor I think I had ever seen in my entire life. I called my ex-husband this morning and I said, "Tell me about that tractor." He said, "Oh, that was a 1948 John Deere B model." Like, great, that's great. So he said, "We're gonna get that running and we're gonna use that to build the roads." So first order of business was get the tractor running. Now, I'm going to school. I was in my internship, so I was working. He was playing around at the co-op with his buddies and getting the tractor to run. And so he would take me out there every day after I'd get off work and show me what they had accomplished that day. So they had that old tractor. Charles Carver and Steve got it running. And I got some chains, and they dragged a telephone pole behind that tractor through those bushes and through that brush in where they thought the roads might probably go, and made this like big circle. So when you go in the Northwest Kingdom, which we also call the 40, there's a road that goes in, that's on common land, the land that's jointly owned by everyone that Preston talked about, the preserve, is common land. It belongs to everyone, and then the community decides what happens on the common land. So when you're driving in, you're on common land, and then there's acres on each side. The 40s common land was all in the center. So there's big area in the center that was common land, and all the acres were all around the edge. So we drove that tractor around and around and around that circle until that brush was all, kind of pulled down so that we could call it a road. So when the road was there, then we could drive back and we found what we thought was our acre. So then the first order of business, we never did go to Alaska, by the way, in case that's your question. The Alaska trip went out the window. We had to use all our money to build a place to live. So I worked, I made the money, and then when I got paid, we'd go buy a couple sheets of plywood, or we'd go buy some, stuff. But our house also was built with tobacco barn lumber. My ex was one of the ones that tore down a tobacco barn, and we used that wood to build it. Our first house was probably, I'm guessing, 10 foot wide by about 12 feet long. And it had a ladder nailed to the wall that went up to a loft, a sleeping loft. Steve told me, well, the whole thing was screened in. There was no actual walls. There was a floor, there were studs, there was screen. And then this loft that you crawled up on a ladder, big enough for a mattress. And then in the roof, he had installed a sliding glass door that somebody had given him. And I looked at that, he said, he thought it would be nice if we could see the stars at night. I'm saying, yeah, that's gonna be great. That is gonna be awesome. And he said, look at this. And it's on hinges, right? He lifts it up and he props a piece of wood in there and it's like open. I said, how are we gonna keep the bugs out? How are we gonna keep the mosquitoes out? He says, I read an article, mosquitoes can't fly up this high. What did you say? What did he say?
He was right.
Deflected, crisis deflected. That was the probably worst night of my life. There were so many mosquitoes. Mosquitoes can fly up that high. But life in the co-op, the first year, how much time do I have? You want some time? I'm doing all right. So the road was first. Building something that we could sleep in was second. Because he kept saying, we won't have to pay any rent. We'll use that money that we're paying for rent to buy building materials. And we're gonna, it's gonna work out better. We're gonna be putting money in the bank. We're gonna be buying building materials and building this house. So we did, we built that thing. Well then, you gotta have water. I mean, if you've been through a hurricane, you gotta have water. Well, we didn't have any water. We didn't have a well. There's no water running out there. We also didn't have any power because we were second after you guys. We didn't get our power as soon as they did. So we didn't have any power. I lived without water and without power for 9 months. 9 long months. And I was working. So we had this little house that we lived in. We had a tent. It wasn't a fancy tent like Tom's. It wasn't one of those big MASH tents. It was like a camping tent, and I had a dresser out there with a broomstick hanging from the top with my clothes hanging on, and that's where I dressed in the morning to go to work. We got a well. We went in with 4 other families. We had a joint well, five families on the well. We all chipped in to get it. Some of that rent money that we were building up, we used to buy a well. And we built a little house, or like a little shed around it that had a concrete floor, and we put a shower out there. So we had a shower that was shared by 5 families. So, and then we had our own shower after we got the well. It was really exciting because we ran a hose over to our house, and it was a pretty good ways, probably from here past that exit to the well. So that hose would lay in the sun all day, and if I could be the first one home, I could take a hot shower. Steve hadn't beat me to it. So that was that, and then we got a power pole. One of the most exciting days ever, we got a construction pole. So back then you paid $5 a month for your construction pole. We had that construction pole for a good couple of years, something like that, with an extension cord running into our little house. So we had power. How did I cook? I had a Coleman stove. How did we keep our food cold? I had a big cooler. Steve's parents lived in town on Meridian Road. They would freeze milk jugs full of water for us, so we had big chunks of ice. And I would stop by there on my way home from work, pick up a couple fresh milk jugs full of ice, put them in the cooler, and that's where we kept our food. So our food was cold. I had a stove. Once we got that hose, then we put a sink in the countertop, but we didn't have like any place to drain it, so we had a bucket underneath the bottom. So the water would go in the top, it would come out the bottom into the bucket, and then once a day you'd have to dump the bucket outside. And usually we'd take it out by the outhouse that was underneath the tree, because we had no bathroom facilities for a good couple of years. We had 3 kids, 3 boys. Of the 3 boys, I left in 1989. That's the next part of the story. We lived out there from 1974 to 1989. I got divorced, and I moved in. We left the kids in the house, and my ex and I took turns moving in and out. We wanted to leave them stable in the house. So we did that for a while. And then I moved back in 2019. My youngest son decided he wanted to live in the land co-op. My kids loved growing up out there. They loved it. My oldest son lives in the house that my ex-husband and I eventually built. We eventually built a large enough house to raise a family in. My oldest son owns that house with his 2 children. My youngest son lives next door to me with his wife and 1 child. And I have 1 son that lives in town. He's a downtown kind of guy. So that's life on the 40. On to you, Dave.
So I just have some little notes here. I'm just gonna ramble until baby tells me to stop. I'm the youngest person that can remember from the very beginning. I was 6 years old in 1973. And I remember walking around when everyone's looking at the property that they're interested in, and I remember rattlesnakes, and I had this cute little backpack that my mom sewed. Let me see, and yeah, remembering waiting for the electricity. We had a little generator and a refrigerator, and I want to say every 4 hours we'd crank up the generator and try and make enough ice so that you could set it up to make it through the night without running this tiny little McCulloch generator from the 70s. And we We came from a Christian church here in town with a family of 3, and then my family of 7. Well, the way it started out was the family of 3 sold their house before our geodesic dome was built. There's actually gonna be 3 domes. The family of 3, the fella taught math at Cobb Middle School. And he was into geodesic domes. And so there was our family of 7, their family of 3, and then my aunt, they had an aunt that also lived there, and then this guy named Gary who wanted to build domes. And he lived in a tent, actually, mostly outside. And so we lived in 1/3/8 geodesic dome that I think it was 30-something feet in diameter with 13 people. And it was because they sold their house and then moved in with us in Benton Hills. And then we sold our house. I guess we didn't think we'd sell the house that fast. Then we all moved into this geodesic dome that was just covered in tar paper, and the windows were just visqueen. And it was not insulated, and we had this tiny little stove that you had to just run it as hard as you could to stay warm. And it was much colder in the 70s. I remember that. And I was 6 years old, and I hated it. I could not stand it. Because, I lived in Benton Hills previously, and I could just walk up to Kate Sullivan to school and all that. So we all moved into this one dome. The idea was we'd build one dome for the family of 3, one dome for the family of 7, and then we'd have a common dome where we'd have the kitchen, library, common area where we hang out, and so they'd be in a triangular shape with boardwalks or slides or zip lines or whatever. But it's hard to live with that many people without electricity. And so we actually had an outhouse. I want to say it was 8 months or a year before we had electricity. And we were under the dome. The dome was up on telephone poles. That's what a lot of folks did. They got free telephone poles and they built their houses on top of it. So our kitchen was a dirt floor underneath, and of course we were cooking with a Coleman stove. And we had an outhouse, and then we rented a Big Bend portalette by the month, I want to say. Well, and actually, so you use the, kind of go back and forth with 13 people between the outhouse and the portalette, to keep either one from getting too disgusting. Because in the humidity, outhouses are just horrible. And I can remember, like at night when you're trying to go to sleep and there's no air conditioning, there's no insulation, it's just like lying there trying not to touch your body with your arms, and your legs are not touching, you're just trying to lie there. And as soon as you touch something, you're just soaking wet and sweaty, and mosquitoes. It was hot. It was like homesteading, I guess. And my mom came from a family. I'm sorry, of 13. I'm sorry about what Pastor Whitney said. And so she wanted us to have the same experience. So I had livestock, chickens, goats, and all that, in a big garden. And so me and my middle sister, we were the ones that took care of the livestock mostly. So getting up early in the morning, and it was so cold. And I would, at one point I was milking 6 goats, and I was like 12 years old. And my mom milked the cow. We had a horse, and we had chickens, rabbits, turkey, goose, anything that was free. And a huge garden that we actually fed like 13 people with. And let me see. And so basically you're in that geodesic dome, and the only privacy is stacked up boxes and like dressers and hanging clothes, you know, but the top was open so you could hear everything. So it was like, you know, prehistoric, you know, one room setups in history. And yeah, so it's kind of weird. I don't really think of us as hippies. I mean, there's a bunch of FSU students and dropouts and their friends.
It was more like camp.
And yeah, and that it was like camp in that everyone was hanging out and just like building their houses and growing gardens. And those were really special times. I think the land co-op survived because we aren't a commune, actually. You own your own property, and there's common land. I mean, just like Killarn or whatever, there's common property, but we do have a complicated governing system that also kind of ties us together in our traditions. And I'm really excited about the next generation coming in. They have to come in, and instead of putting $100 down and $30 a month and having a tent, now they have to be able to come up with hundreds of thousands of dollars, and yet still try to have the same ethos, you know, and ethos as, you know, the back to the land thing, and they're doing it. It's like, it's amazing for me to see the way they're able to have their businesses, have enough money to do it, and figuring out the culture and everything. So that's one thing I try to do is be kind of a bridge between the original folks and the younger folks, and try to make it so we can continue on for another 50 years maybe.
Kevin, that one down to Kevin.
Is there enough?
Yeah.
Alrighty. Hey everybody, my name is Jasmine Kelly. So thankfully they've already been over the past. I try to cover that myself.
Don't dwell.
That's good advice. So instead I'm going to share with you guys what it's like to be the new kid on this old block. Can I say that?
Sure.
So quite frankly, my partner Scott and I over there had no idea what we were getting into when we moved into MLC back in 2019, right? We were just looking for something different. So we knew we didn't want a house, like a cookie cutter suburb house. We just wanted like a little cabin in the woods somewhere. And we found it. It was all the way down a very literal, long and winding road. When we got there, we were surprised to find that every single door was unlocked. It was kind of like the house was saying, hey, come on in, door's open. And that was my first clue that MLC was not your normal neighborhood. So before we even finished unpacking, Tom, who was here earlier, and his wife Rose threw us a welcome party. It was like being invited to a stranger's family reunion where somehow you ended up being the guest of honor. New neighbors brought us home-cooked food, and they gave us hugs like we were old friends. They were all excited to meet the young people who bought Jason and Wendy's house. How they called us for a while. And then one of them will be like, oh man, what a great place. I built your porch. And then another one, oh, I put the roof over y'all's heads. So they knew more about our house than we did, actually. And I'll tell you, being the youngest homeowner there, I showed up with what I thought were brilliant ideas, like paving our dirt roads. Yeah, that went over really well. So I pitched that one to James, actually, and he was very nice. Didn't have to be, he was very nice, and he grinned at me, and he explained.
I also wanted that, but I was.
So you knew what I was talking about, yeah, okay. And he explained to me, you know, that it's not an accident that the roads ended up this way. It wasn't like an oversight. Oh, how can we not think about that? It was intentional, you know. Because having those dirt roads, they make you slow down, right? And you take your time, you look around, and You see all the trees by the road, and you see your neighbors, and you take the time to wave at them. We always wave everywhere we go. And, you know, once I understood that, I really started seeing these intentional choices everywhere in the neighborhood. And you want to talk about visionaries? You know, these people went from living in tents in a swamp, I'm still in a swamp, but they now have houses that look like they sprung from some hippie's acid trip. That makes sense, right? Out there we've got geodesic domes on stilts. Actually, we have several. There's a tower with a top floor that's like a yurt with like a 360-degree view, and that's geodesic. Man. And instead of manicured lawns and privacy fences, we've got wild acres where property lines just kind of blur into walking trails. It's organic and awesome and totally chaotic, which I think actually encapsulates the co-op pretty well. And I'll tell you, as soon as I started to grasp kind of what was going on here, I couldn't help but want to jump right in. And I started showing up at our town council meetings. I know Barb mentioned a little bit about that, but it's kind of like the co-op's version of a board meeting, if you can imagine that kind of thing. And, you know, I'd never been on a board, I'd never been in government, I was never like involved in politics or debate or anything, but there was just something about this place that really just hooked me and I wanted to get involved. And it got me excited about things I never thought I'd care about before. I mean, I started taking the minutes almost immediately, and talk about diving into the deep end, right, head first. It was like all of a sudden I was just there writing history in real time, but I was still trying to figure out what half the acronyms meant. You know. But pretty soon I wasn't just taking notes, I was really falling down the MLC rabbit hole. It's quite a story. And I was like digging through these old file cabinets, piecing together this whole story, like one dusty piece of paper at a time. And it was kind of like, you know the feeling when you start a puzzle, but you don't have the box, so you can't really see the whole picture? It was like that. Everything I'd find, it was like, okay, one more puzzle piece in place. And so I was connecting the dots between our old notes, our decades of pages from our bi-weekly community newsletter, the Alternate Current, which has been coming out for 50 years now, longer. Pretty incredible. And so I started to see this whole picture taking shape, and it was showing me not just what MLC was, but how it got here and what it is today. And I will say, you know, the founders can be protective of what they've created, you know, which is for good reason, right? It's awesome. And even still, they welcome newcomers like us with open arms and endless patience. They forgive us when we unknowingly trample all over some sacred, unwritten and unspoken rule. And, you know, whenever we innocently reignite an old debate that started before we were born. And in return, we're learning how to carry this whole thing forward. But the real magic of MLC isn't just the weird, impossible houses or the swampy waterfront views, or even the wonderful bunch of misfits who made their home here. You know, you guys, obviously, all fans, yeah. But it's how we show up for one another. You know, back in 2013, there was a pine tree out there that fell in a really inconvenient place, which was right on top of our little cabin. So that was unfortunate, but it actually helped us because we really learned what community really means, right? So in most neighborhoods, you might get some thoughts and prayers, you know, maybe you get a sympathy card or something, but at MLC, we got a whole month of home-cooked meals. Actually, Davey himself brought us the first one the night that happened. And two of our best friends, Kelly and Dave, let us live in their home for as long as we needed, which, I mean, how could you ask for more, right? Such an incredible thing. And living here really has changed me in ways I never expected. You know, I started small, you know, helping out, set up events, staying late to clean up, jumping into any project that needed an extra hand that people would let me help with. And the next thing I knew, I was hooked on this whole making stuff happen thing. I brought back game nights, which turned out to be a tradition people were missing, actually. I helped start karaoke nights, which have become a tradition in their own right, and you should definitely come if you ever hear about one. It's quite a good time. But here's what really gets me though, is that this mindset doesn't just stay at MLC. You know, Scott and I catch ourselves creating little pockets of community everywhere we go. Once you know what real community feels like, you just can't help but build it everywhere. So, what is this place really? MLC isn't a commune, but people love to call us that. But we're not exactly a typical cooperative either. We're something uniquely in between. We own our homes individually, but we share our lives collectively. And I don't just mean that we share the fun stuff, although, I mean, we really do know how to have a good time. We have endless debates about things like whether or not to uproot a beloved lemon tree that's in the path of a proposed walkway. Don't worry, the lemon tree won. Or renaming Independence Day to Interdependence Day, which, when you think about it, actually fits us perfectly. When Scott and I turned down that long and winding dirt road back in 2019, we thought we were just buying a cabin in the woods. But what I really found was a place where I belonged. It's like there's proof that there is another way to live. Somehow, some way, we found ourselves right smack dab in the middle of this incredible story that's been unfolding for half a century. And now we're not just reading that story, we're helping to write the next chapters. And with the wisdom who came before us, and the energy of those still to come, we're gonna make sure it's a story worth telling. Because let me tell you something. There's no story I'd rather be a part of, and there's no place I'd rather be than out here with them at MLC. Thank you.
Question time? Yes, do we have time for, yes, we do.
I'd like to hear more of James's story.
About
You went out there when you were 6.
6,
And you're in your 50s now?
Yeah, 58.
What happened to make let you know that that's where you wanted to be?
I have 4 other siblings and they all left the city, but I never for a second. Actually, when I was 15, I started building a place for myself. And then my mom broke out a piece of property where I was building my little cabin for a woman who didn't want to leave anything to her kids. So I was supposed to build this thing and then it would revert to my mom's heirs, but after 5 years she hadn't done it, and so I actually got that property back and built a place for myself. But yeah, the co-ops provide everything for me. I have a couple businesses. I met my wife there. I must have 25 mentors, and yeah, I'm gonna die there. There's just no. It's so messy. I don't want this to seem like a Pollyanna thing. It's so complicated, and I've been mad at just about everybody, you know. But then you realize that you get, you know, enough times pass to where you realize that you get through it, and then, you know, you're gonna be friends, and you're just gonna keep on going way through the mire.
Yes, sir.
I read about the spin-off corporation that's developing a green cemetery.
Yes, sir.
Can you talk about that?
Yes, sir. Turns out, thank you. It turns out that there was 100 acres just to the west of the,
Just to the left of the land co-op, just to the west of the land co-op, and you know, it was land that was probably going to be developed, and there were all kinds of different plans, you know, people were making for it. And some visionary people in our community got together and said, you know, that'd be a really nice piece of land to preserve, and it'd also be a nice place for natural burials. So this is independent of the co-op. It's money was raised, and we've actually purchased the land. We owe a lot of money on it still. There's a corporation called Hickory Reserve, and they're buying the land. And then, yeah, thank you. Is it upside down? Yes, upside down. I'm upside down, but it's called Red Hills Cemetery, Community Cemetery, and it's a place for natural burials. So the reason that we kind of even found out about this is my next door neighbor Toby passed away and was interred in a similar cemetery, a conservation cemetery down in Gainesville. We thought that's a really cool thing. And so some folks in the community, Kelly McGrath has been kind of the spark plug for this, and she's the person to talk to about it. But there are some brochures for it out in the lobby if you're interested in it. It's not just for the co-op. We need 100 members to make the cemetery happen. We've got 76 now, I think, so we're well on our way. And if you're interested in it, please see me afterwards. I'd be happy to give you Kelly's contact information. Anybody? Yes, sir.
One of the comments that I found most interesting was that your organization has lasted longer than many similar efforts.
Yes, sir.
And in part, we mentioned that it was an individual ownership of the house, of the cooperative nature. Can you elaborate a little bit on that?
Yes,
That's
sir.
an interesting.
Well, it was a problem for us, and I'll speak to that. Anybody else, feels like they want to speak to it too. But it was a problem for us because, when we were young and foolish, and some of us tried to get mortgages, trying to borrow money from financial institutions, they'd look at us and they say, "Well, you're not a typical subdivision, are you?" And we'd say, "No, we're not. We have more land. We're good. Like what, about a third of our land is held in common. So that's not like, it's not like most subdivisions." And just like King Healy said when he was coming down here, we're not trying to, to cram 6 houses on an acre. An acre of land is the smallest piece of land you can have at the co-op to build a house on. And we're not a PUD. We're not a special taxation district. We just didn't fit any of those things. So it was a problem for us, and it took a while for the banks to figure us out. And at one point, I won't say the name of the institution, but there was a bank in town that we had our initial mortgage with. I may not have the story quite right, but we kind of came to a point where we had a cash flow problem because we were getting those payments in, and we had this cash flow problem, and the bank wasn't interested in working with us on it. But at that time, we had over 100 households in our community, and they all had, where most of us had accounts at that bank, including some businesses, including people with a little bit of wealth and so on. And we went to the bank and said, "We'd really like you to work this out." They wouldn't do it. We went to another bank in town and said, "If you will do this for us, we'll bring you all of our accounts." And on that day, hundreds of accounts were closed at the first bank and opened at the second bank. And bankers in this town, I've talked to some who still know that story. So. Yes, ma'am.
I'm just curious about what your day jobs are.
Well, there's some retired people here. I was a research scientist.
I worked in state government in a variety of different positions.
I did also. I was the state long-term care ombudsman for 12 years, and we investigated nursing home and assisted living complaints. We were located in the governor's office, and then later in the Department of Elder Affairs, and then I worked for a private attorney for another 9 years. Finished up in Medicaid as the hospice policy analyst for the state of Florida.
I had a chimney sweeping company for 11 years that I ran at the same time as a geothermal company for now 30 years. And my wife teaches at FSU.
Well, and I'm glad you did do that work with geothermal, because he put in our geothermal actually. That's awesome. I'm an entrepreneur. I own a small e-commerce business with my partner Scott, and I definitely have to say that living in the co-op is a big part of the reason why that happens. A lot of entrepreneurs out there, it's very inspirational.
Any other questions?
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
What's your population and how many houses y'all have?
So there's, let me say one thing before I talk about the population. One of the things about the Northwest Kingdom that Barbara didn't say is that when we first platted the Northwest Kingdom, there was a circular acre on the Northwest Kingdom, the only circular platted acre east of the Mississippi River. But we have approximately 100 households in our community, and they range from single people like young Preston here to people with multiple children and so on. So I couldn't give you a population count. Actually, James' dad, his late dad Jerry, used to go and do a survey every year on New Year's, a census every year on New Year's Day.
I'm on the elections committee, and we have about 180 voters, so adult people that are on deeds, not counting kids.
Maybe 100 households?
About 100, yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
What are the names of the other neighborhoods?
Oh, okay, well,
I live in the Wild West. We have the Heights group, we have the Shuttle group, yes, the Far East, Imaginary, the Equally Spaced Cadets, yeah, and the Northwest Kingdom. The roads also, you might have noticed, we have a beetle motif in our roads, and one of the mistakes we made was naming Long and Winding Road before we built it.
I live on Abbey Road.
We had to rename Penny Lane because there's another Penny Lane.
Yeah, well, ours was there first, and but they made us change it because we didn't register it at some point or something. But we figured that was not a fight we wanted to have. There are more important things to fight over. Any other questions? Yes, back there.
What is most of your common land used for? Is it green space?
It's green space for the most part. We have a lot of like a community center that has like a really beautiful facility. We have a community center that's just gorgeous. So it was thanks to the generosity of one of our late members who endowed the co-op with enough money to build that building. We have a brand new pizza oven that's 36 inches in diameter, fired with wood, and it was fired up last night, as a matter of fact, and I had a piece. It was good. We have a firehouse. That's right. We have a firehouse. We started the fire department a long time ago, and a few years ago we merged with the Miccosukee Fire Department. So, but we have a
pickleball court and a petanque court.
petanque court, yes.
Central mail facility, the kiosk.
We have a mail kiosk, and we have
Volleyball court.
we have two different fire rings and that are community fire rings, and we have a big giant grill that's big enough to hold a whole pig. Sorry, vegetarians, but it's big enough to hold a 160-pound pig. Yes, sir.
Please tell me you don't have pickleball courts.
We do have pickleball, not pickleball court, and we have an active league too.
I have a comment about the different places that we have. Our mail kiosk is a place where if you want to find out what's happening in the community, everybody there not only has a USPS mailbox, but the people who live on the 240 down in Northwest Kingdom has their own mail and things like that. But everybody there we have a wooden thing where you have a mailbox there for that. And in the old days, that you could the packages we have a package facility for USPS and FedEx and all those folks. But it was interesting because you could go to get your mail, and so one of your neighbors would come and say, well, I think I'll go and maybe stop by Tom and Sally's house tonight, and you tell them, oh, I don't think you ought to do that tonight. And they, oh, well, why is that? Well, I just noticed in the parcel locker here that Sally got this package from Victoria's Secret. It might not be a good package.
Yeah, in the early days, we actually would get a big bag of mail from the post office, and we would sort it ourselves, and you knew who was getting the naughty magazines. Just now.
How often do people move in and out?
We have a waiting list. We have there's usually 2 or 3 houses that are available at any given time at the co-op, we just had a family move in just this last week, as a matter of fact, and I haven't met him yet. I'm looking forward to it. But there's pretty good traffic in and out. As far as the original members of the co-op, those first 100 people, there's about a dozen of us still that are in the community and still living there. So it's yes, ma'am.
With the two parts of the community being separated, how do you maintain the feeling of connectivity between the two parts?
Well, they're different places. I mean,
Volleyball.
Yeah, volleyball, so it's, and parties, you know, we have a lot of parties. A lot of parties, Mardi Gras is getting ready to happen, and then we have, we have memorials out there too, when people pass in our community, that usually the day or the next day, we have a big bonfire and people come together, so that's, we have a lot of connectedness, and a lot of us, a lot of the kids went to the same schools and they were coming up and everything, so, I think I see the hook coming out. Yes,
One
ma'am.
quick question, has anybody written your story?
Yes, we have an archivist, and Linda Deaton, who used to be the curator at the Tallahassee Museum, is our community archivist now. Our second archivist, it was Katie Hunter until she passed away. We have an active archive, and then several of us have written. I wrote a little bit of a history of the co-op when we had our 50th anniversary last year. So there are people that are writing about us. David Felder, who was mentioned earlier, wrote a book called The Best Investment: Land in a Loving Community that he self-published and was hawking for years and years. I don't know if there's any copies of that left, but anyway. Anybody? Yes, ma'am.
Is it all homes, stick and mortar homes, or are there mobile homes?
There are no mobile homes, ma'am. And we have.
I'm visualizing, I was out there in the early 70s.
Yes, ma'am.
And I remember a mobile home.
Well, I lived in a mobile home when I first got there, and
A time limit that got extended and extended.
yeah, I had a Pontiac Chief mobile home, and when we finally got ready to build our house, I'd given it to a friend of mine who was a janitor at the university, and he lived on Capitol Circle, probably where Lowe's or something is now. And so I told him he could have that thing. He didn't have a way of getting it into town, so I hooked it up to the back of our tractor, and I hauled it into town one Sunday morning, and a state trooper stopped me, and he said, "Well, sir, you're violating about 15 different laws here." But he said, "If I arrest you, I'm gonna have to deal with that damn mobile home, so just take it where you're going and go home and don't ever do this again." Any other questions? Thank you very much. Wasn't this a great program? Well, we do have a few, it's already almost spring, and spring is festival time, and event after event after event is going to be rolling down upon us and so forth. And so just a reminder, next weekend, the 21st through 23rd, is the weekend with Lafayette, the 200th anniversary of Lafayette getting his big land grab here and so forth. And on Friday, they're going to be rededicating the marker in Lafayette Park. And Saturday, it's the symposium over at St. John's Church, Saturday afternoon, and then Sunday. Becky Berenson here. Becky, you want to stand up and shout a little bit on this?
Okay, hi everybody, I'm Becky. I'm the chapter agent for the Fort St. Louis chapter, Daughters of the American Revolution. And we are helping out with the symposium. So a huge thank you to the Historical Society for all of your support with this. We have some phenomenal speakers coming in from UNC Chapel Hill. We've got Chuck Schwamp from the American Friends of Lafayette, and we have another speaker out of Lafayette College. Plus we've got some people that are going to pop in. It's almost at capacity now. You can go to the Tallahassee Historical Society to sign up. We're limited to 60 people at St. John's Church, but we are unlimited in the virtual capacity, so you can also watch from home. So I encourage you, it's the first, probably last time we'll ever do this, to celebrate Lafayette, and we want you all to enjoy it. So thank you.
So there's that coming up. Then on March the 5th, I guess we'll probably do it. We're going to dedicate the, is it the 5th or 6th one of our historical markers? We're going to do 10 of these, as you know, and this marker will be to the Velda Mound, which is a Native American mound out in Arbor Hills on South Baldwin Street. So we'll be doing that on the 5th, and then probably the week after that, we'll be doing a marker to down in Bel Air, the location of Bel Air down on the Woodville Highway, south of town, which is of course where everybody in town in the 1840s fled the yellow fever epidemic and so forth. So there's that, and then March 22nd, sorry, there is the History Festival down at Kleeman Plaza. And then March 13th, a week from tonight, I guess, it's our meeting, and I'll let Will give you a little bit on that.
Yes, come back to this very location on March 13th and be transported to the subtropical shores of South Florida and learn a little bit about the Key Marco cat from our speaker, Austin Bell, who is the curator of the Museum of Florida History, so it should be fun.
Gosh, I know I'm missing something. I know we talked about having a field trip this spring, and we'd like to do that if we can wedge in one of the weekends to do it. Maybe go down to the Spanish Fort at St. Mark's. Everybody just sort of stay tuned for that if we can figure out a date for it. Am I leaving? I feel like I'm leaving something out.
There must be 2 more days left that you haven't.
I know. I can't figure it out. Anyway.
The history fair, whatever you call.
The History Festival on March 22nd down at Kleeman Plaza. That's right. Yes.
Do you know anything that's going on at the IMAX Theater Sunday at 12 o'clock?
Oh yes, thank you. Yes, thank you. That's the. If you have not seen the movie that they made, the documentary that they made, A Cabin in the Woods, about the construction of the log cabin, you should go down to IMAX. This is it Sunday? Sunday at 12:30. They've had one showing of it, and I think it's on the YouTube as well. The city's put it there, but and Sandy Brooks has been basically in charge of trying to keep the docent project running.
We need volunteers.
Yeah, you need to. Yeah. I need people to come down there and because there's been a lot of people coming through down there, and it's quite an amazing.
We just had all 4th graders in Leon County come through.
Yeah, it's quite an amazing.
It was fun.
And there's stuff going on. I mean, then we've got, of course, Springtime Tallahassee and the LaMoine Arts Festival and all sorts of stuff coming up. And so we will try to be at each one of those and with tables and so forth. So we hope you all will join us. So anyway, thank you all for coming tonight. Thank you all.